Afternoon. Welcome to the third episode in our New Year, New Me digital event series, where we're focusing on wellbeing and starting our year off with a really good boost. This event is hosted by the CMI Wales Board. My name's Kath Austin. I'm the chair of the board, and I'll be shortly handing you over to Jessica Edwards, who will begin today's event. Just a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces. If you have any questions during the event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen. I will be collecting all your questions today. If we do have a chance to respond later on in the session, we will, but we'll also be making a record of them for the fourth and final session, where we've got a bit longer with a panel of experts to be able to pose your questions to. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those that are booked to attend and are going to be rewatching at a later time. The event recording will also be available on CMI's website and CMI's YouTube channel. So we look forward to another fantastic event this week. I hope the last couple have been helpful to you. And without further ado, over to Jess Edwards from our Light Experience Lead at Sarsen to begin tonight's event. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kath. I'm very happy to be here back with you all. Welcome back if you joined us for either of our other two events, and welcome in if this is your first one. So I'd like to start, much as we did the last two sessions, if you were with us then, with a short grounding exercise. Just land us in the space to leave behind our busy days that we've come from and arrive and feel present. So I'm going to invite you to sit a little taller in your chair. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. I'm going to close mine. And find your feet on the floor. And just let them be really nicely grounded on the floor. Uncrossing your legs if you can. And bringing your hands to rest comfortably in your lap. And just start to tune into your breath. It's a really good way to land yourself in a space. Just being aware of your breath. And now, don't judge or change your breath. Just notice where it's sitting today, where it's wanting to sit. Is it shallow or deep? Is it in the chest, in the throat, in the belly? Is it light or easy or a little more challenging today? Don't judge or change, just notice. And as you notice the breath, just start to imagine as you breathe in through the nose, the breath is travelling down the throat and all the way down the spine. And I'd like you to imagine it either visually or like a sensation of warmth or light moving up and down the spine. So as you inhale, the breath moves all the way down the spine. As you exhale, it moves all the way back up. Gently starting to deepen your breath now, just breathing in through the nose, imagining that breath, that energy, if you like, travelling down the spine, all the way to the root of the spine, rooting you down into your chair, into the floor. And then as you exhale, the breath, the energy moving all the way back up the spine. And just gently drawing your attention to that part of your body. That's all we're doing. Just causing our awareness, our attention to move to this part of the body as we gently inhale and exhale. Inhaling and exhaling. And as you continue to do that, I want you to start to notice any sounds that are around you. Can you tune in to the sound of the room that you're in? What can you hear? Perhaps the sound of radiators or heating. If you're in the UK, it's a chilly day today for me in London. Perhaps the sound of floorboards moving, bricks. Perhaps the sound of water. Maybe the sound of others moving around your house, friends, family, pets. Little sounds of movement. Now expand your awareness. Is there anything you can hear outside the house? Or the flat, or the room, or the office that you're in? Perhaps the sound of traffic, if you're near a street. Perhaps the sound of weather, Wind or rain, if you're here in the UK. What can you hear? Perhaps the sound of people outside. Perhaps even the sound of a plane overhead. Just allowing your awareness to expand out from your body, your spine, where we started, into your room, the room that you're in, into the building that you're in, and out into the street outside. Just allowing those sounds that you hear, that you notice, to come and go. Much like the breath, don't judge or change, just notice. We'll go one layer deeper. Is there anything else you can hear? Anything even further? Perhaps the sound of birds, trees, those sounds that we don't always notice because they're muffled under the other everyday sounds. Perhaps even as we listen this carefully, the sound of your own blood moving around your body and connecting with all of these other sounds that you're tuning into. And just come back to the breath one final time. Inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the nose. Imagining once more that energy moving up and down the spine. Moving down the spine all the way to the root on the inhale, and moving back up the spine and out of the nose on the exhale. And as you breathe, feel a sense of connection to everybody else who's here breathing with you in all of our different homes and offices and flats and buildings. All of us connected by doing this together. And now, just becoming aware that soon we'll open our eyes again, come back to be in the visual world, in the physical world, come out of this sense of awareness, but maybe taking some of this peace and gentleness with you, this curiosity, this turning inwards, this noticing. As you next breathe in, just opening up the eyes, having a little look around whatever space you're in, just taking in the objects around you, maybe looking at the sky if you're near a window, maybe looking down at the ground, just allowing yourself to land back in the space together with everybody else. And welcome in. Thank you if you practiced along with me. I really like to do a kind of landing, grounding exercise together. It really helps me kind of shake off the day, the busyness and the intensity of the day. So thank you if you chose to do that with me. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our practitioner this week. We're going to be hearing from Scilla Elworthy, who's a really extraordinary person. She's a 3-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and she's an expert in conflict resolution. Now, that might not sound like an obvious kind of well-being or mindfulness practice to you, but she's an expert in listening, which is why I chose to use some of the tuning in, the listening exercise that we did in that grounding session then. So first of all, we're going to play a short video where you'll hear a little bit more about Scilla and her journey. And then we're going to play a slightly longer video where Scilla will actually talk you through the practice of deep listening. And how you might apply that in a mindful way to your everyday life, both at home and at work. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Scilla. We'll hear from her now.
I would definitely describe myself as a peace builder. From the age of 13, I knew that I had no option but to try and stop people killing each other. And that was an experience of quite strong brutality when I watched a grainy old black and white TV of the Soviet invasion of Budapest. And I saw kids not much older than me being mowed down by these huge tanks. And I rushed upstairs and started packing my suitcase. And my mum came up and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to Budapest." I didn't know where Budapest was, but she said, "What for?" And I said, "Well, there's something so horrible happening there, I have to go now." And she said, "Don't be so silly." And I burst into tears. And she got it, bless her, she got it. She said, "Okay, I understand that's really important, but you're too young to help anybody at the age of 13. So I will see to it that you get trained if you will just unpack your suitcase." And she did. She sent me off to work in a holiday home for concentration camp survivors when I was 16. And I peeled potatoes on the lawn for a whole summer, listening to their experiences. And that set me off, knowing that that kind of brutality has to stop. What I have done really for the past half century is start initiatives in different parts of the world to enable local people to bring about a more peaceful society for themselves. I was with Nelson Mandela when I was working on the elders with Richard Branson, and there was a moment just before the launch of this new plan for the elders when Mandela came into the room, leaning heavily on Peter Gabriel's arm, sat down to talk to about 60 of us. And when he began to speak, I got goosebumps. And he's not an orator. He doesn't use flashy phrases, but when he finished speaking, 25 minutes later, I still had goosebumps. And I said to myself, what on earth is going on? And it took me a while to realize that what I was receiving viscerally was the energy of that man's integrity. You could not push him over. What he stood for, he stood for. And that was such a learning that it's possible. I think he would say it's possible for any of us to develop that solidity, that clarity, that you will stand firm and stand for what you believe. I learned how vital it is to really listen through making the mistakes that we all make. Because we all think we're good listeners, but most of the time when somebody else is speaking, we're making up the answer, we're thinking, oh, I've done one of those, or we're rationalizing, but we're not actually present to the feelings that are going on in that person. At this time of crisis and stretch, and when so many people are feeling anxious and unsure of themselves and possibly in conflict, this is the time when we really have the opportunity to go deep, to be far more aware of how others are really feeling, particularly because we've been on screen such a lot. I'll give you one example. With my two colleagues at work, we have been meeting every Monday morning online. And what we do now is we introduce the question, tell me, how are you really today? And that exempts people from saying, I'm fine, which is what we do. But then people will say something like, oh, well, I had a worrying call with my mum last night, and then you can just see that by that person's face. It's, you're getting where they are and what they might need. So you can quickly respond in a way that you couldn't if they just said, oh, I'm fine, and went on with the business of the day. So we find that the investment of, say, 15 minutes at the beginning of an online meeting is worth gold. And I would say that's true for families meeting up, when they haven't seen each other, to really sit down and say, how's this been for you? How are you really? And then people will come out with the most extraordinary things that you wouldn't have expected, and that you can then count as valuable and use to understand them better. And that preempts so many rows in families. Deep listening is the most precious tool to have in your back pocket. There's a ton of information that comes when we give another human being our full attention. It's the greatest gift we can give to anyone, our full attention. And it never fails, never fails.
Great. I wanted to take a moment before we go on to watch the longer practice video with Scilla, where she'll talk you through some of the exercises that she uses. I wanted to take a moment just to reflect on that question that she left us with. How are you really? And I love that question. I've been working with Scilla for a few months now, and I've been using it often in the way that she suggests, as a way of checking in with my teammates, with colleagues, when I'm running workshops, always in person and online. It works in both contexts, and I'd urge you to give it a go. It can feel sometimes a bit confronting the first time you do it, and I think it's obviously completely fine to say, oh yeah, no, I'm fine. But one of the tools that I use, so as well as my work with Sarton, I'm also a theatre director, and one of the tools that I use when I'm in rehearsal is a check-in like this. And we encourage each other to speak for as long or as short as we like, but up to 3 minutes, uninterrupted. And this quality of lack of interruption is really magical, without wanting to sound too grand, because it allows people to really think about how they are. And it stops it from turning into a conversation, which might sound strange, but it is a space for people to truly reflect and others to bear witness to that introspection, that reflection. And there are so few places in modern life that we can do that. So I just wanted to offer that to you as a really remarkably simple and powerful tool to try out with your teams. It's a brilliant, brilliant thing. And now I'd like to hand back over to Scilla to dig a little bit deeper into deep listening.
Challenges of listening. Of course, we all think we're good listeners, and most of us are not. So I'm going to spend the next half hour with you sorting out how this works and how we can really employ listening to everyone's advantages, particularly your own. Let me start with a story. I was engaged by the CEO of a very large international company to talk to her 26 senior vice presidents at a very posh resort. And in I came for the first session and said to them, I'm going to lead us through a session on listening. Listening, they said, we don't need that. We listen all the time to our staff and all the people who work for us, and listening, for heaven's sake. And I said, well, great. We'll just check how good you are at listening. So I got them to put away their phones. I got them to uncross their legs. I got them to sit opposite each other and keep eye contact for 10 minutes. Bodies squirmed with impatience. The body language was absolutely graphic. But as the end of the first half-hour session came near, I could see concentration was really dawning. There were some frowning faces, some people quite white with anxiety at what they were discovering. The long and short of it was that at the end of 3 months, the CEO told me what you taught us about listening enables us to resolve in 15 minutes what would have taken 4 hours of arguing and still not been solved. So we're now building it into the values statement of our company, the value of listening. So why is listening important? That's my first question. Listening is important because when we don't know how to listen, we miss about 90% of the most important information we can gain from another person. Why is listening potentially important for you? Because when you can hone your listening skills, when you can become a deeply committed, interested listener, you will be able to transform any disagreements, any conflicts, any upsets that come up in your family, in your community, maybe even in your children's school. It's an invaluable tool, and one that you can take with you once you ingest it, once you build it into your system for the rest of your life. It has served me in the most challenging situations that I've been in conflict situations, working with people who are stopping other people being killed in different hot conflict situations in the Congo, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, and so on. And I just want to let you know one prime example of listening at the highest level, not just at the domestic and local level. And this is Nelson Mandela. I was lucky enough to work with him and Richard Branson setting up an international organization called the Elders. And when I came into his presence and watched him, as it was a great privilege to do, I observed this extraordinary focus that he had when somebody else was speaking. Because most premiers, important people, even ambassadors, are so busy with the impressions of everything that's going on in the room, the tensions, what they're trying to say and so on, that they actually are unable to listen. Mandela, by contrast, was simply utterly present. And the focus that he gave to whoever was speaking to him was so direct, so receptive, and so steady that it transformed the way that person spoke. It enabled that person to be their natural self and to communicate with him as if he was not the president of a great country like South Africa. And let me now give you a quote from Maya Angelou, which I love. She said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel." And that's what we're talking about in this module. We're talking about how you can take a situation that is tense, difficult, fraught, quarrelsome, and transform it into a situation that you and the other person or the other people really learn from. Just before we start the exercise, let me tell you what the ingredients of listening are. And there's one prime one, which you might not guess. And that is that the focus has to move from you to another human being, totally. So this is why inner work is so important, because it enables you to observe what you are up to notice the words going around in your head or the inner critic. When you're going to really listen to somebody, the ingredients include that that person is your focus. That person is more important than you. And then it'll be your turn to be listened to in the exercise that we do. Another of the key ingredients of listening is curiosity. That you become really curious about what this other person is conveying to you and why. And you begin to be able to notice that in their body movements, maybe even the colour of their skin changing, in the tone of their voice, and in the movements, the inflections that they may make. All these clues give you 100% more information than you would have if you're doing what most of us do when we're listening, which is thinking about a clever response, thinking to myself, ooh, I've got one of those, worrying about what's for tea, and probably making judgments about the other person. That's what a lot of us do. You probably do some other things as well. So the exercise that we're going to go through will enable us to practice actually the concentration and the curiosity, which are the keys to being a great listener. And then we'll talk after the exercise about the benefits, what you will gain. So now that we're ready, we're going to practice this exercise. And let's say that it starts with a situation that's blown up between you and another person where it's really hard to have any communication whatsoever. It could be a family issue, it could be something to do with your employment, it could be a community issue, an argument about people's boundaries and hedges and so forth. So the key 4 words that we start with, that you would say to this person with whom you're in disagreement, these 4 words are, would you be willing? Would you be willing to spend half an hour with me? And during that half hour, I will ask you to speak first about how you feel about what's between us. I mean, we both know that we've got some disagreement and we haven't been able to really talk about it. And I'd ask you to speak first, without pointing finger, about what it means to you, this conflict, how you've been feeling. And I will listen to you so carefully that when you've finished, after about 5 minutes, I will say back to you what I've heard, what matters to you. And I'll try to also say how I think you were feeling, what I picked up about your feelings. And you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. And then we'll change over. And I will speak for 5 minutes, and I'll speak from my heart. I'll tell you as best I can what it's been like in the first person for me in this conflict for about 5 minutes. And when you see 5 minutes is up on your watch, you can tell me. And you will kindly listen to me so carefully that you can say back to me the gist of what I said, plus any impressions you have of my feelings. Did I seem to be fearful or sad or just angry? What was going on? It's amazing what we pick up in this way. Because once we know how the other person is feeling, because you or I would be speaking in the first person, once we know how the other person is actually feeling, we can move from the mind that says, I'm right and you're wrong, to the heart that says, oh my goodness, is that how she feels? Or is that how he feels? Then we've got the beginning of a bridge. At the heart level, we're building a bridge over which we can cross into some kind of real communication. And then we can find our way into a totally different kind of communication. And I've never known this to fail. The reason being that as long as the mind is busy making judgments, we can't assess what is really going on between us. We can't feel it. And in this exercise, we're able to even name it. It does take courage, but you'll find that if you have the courage to initiate this process with the other person, you will make a breakthrough in what might have been troubling you or your family or your boss or your employee for weeks, months, even generations. So I've used this in my family where there are many intergenerational issues. It took all my bravery to initiate the conversations, but now it's proved extraordinary. It's actually enabled the love that was there underneath, the affection, to emerge. Listening works in all sorts of different situations, and they don't have to be conflict ones. Real listening is a way of paying somebody respect. Just take your mind back to the last time you were talking about something important and somebody was taking notes. How did that make you feel? I imagine it made you feel that they were paying you respect. They thought what you were saying was important enough that they wanted to write it down. And that's what we're doing in this exercise. You're giving another person, in whatever situation it is, it could be a business meeting, it could be a discussion about future plans for a school, whatever, that you are paying the person who is speaking your attention by maybe writing something down. Now, in a conflict situation, I suggest that you don't write, that you just concentrate so hard that you have ingested, as I say, not just the words, but the feelings behind the words. So now let's just take a moment quiet. And I'd like you to conjure up, just imagine, a person with whom you have had or you still have a conflict. Just close your eyes for a moment. I'm closing mine as I speak to you. Just close your eyes and conjure up that person in front of you. How are you feeling? Are you anxious, knowing that you're going to offer them a way through? Let's just take you into that feeling for a moment. It will be a brilliant preparation for when you do this actually with this person. Now that you're aware of your own anxiety maybe, or need for courage, now that you've recognized that, this is good self-knowledge, you can be really present. So imagine yourself saying to the other person, would you be willing to spend half an hour with me? And etc., what I said in the first exercise. Let's link this now to the wider skills that are becoming necessary as a result of the pandemic, as a result of so many people feeling anxious, closing down, fearful, people not knowing where their livelihood is going to come from in the future, people having elderly relatives who are fearful and suffering, maybe some even meeting their last days. Hugely demanding situations that we're all facing. What is becoming invaluable in these situations, in every one of these situations, is compassion. Now, when I first heard the word compassion, it sounded a bit biblical and a bit goody, you know, and I thought, oh, I don't think I could do that. And it sounded as though Jesus could do it or saints could do it, but not me. And then somebody introduced the word empathy. And I got that. Empathy literally means feeling for another. Feeling for another. And that's why I love the fact that empathy means I can feel what you're feeling. Compassion means I take it to another stage, means that I act on the empathy, the empathetic feelings I have. So let's imagine that you're walking down a street in a busy city and there's somebody suffering on the sidewalk and begging, clearly hungry. And your heart goes out. You feel, oh my God, I wouldn't like to be a refugee in that situation, desperate. And you feel that feeling and you walk on. That's empathy. Compassion is you feel that feeling and then you walk to the nearest cafe or shop, you buy a sandwich that you would like to eat and a cup of tea, or you even ask the person what they would like and you go and fetch that. So you then act, you do something. Maybe the easiest thing is to drop some money into their bowl, but for what everybody who's been in a begging situation says is that when there's a connection between me and another person, such that they ask me what I need and go and try and fetch it for me, that is what matters to me. So that's compassion in action. And it's a very great part of all the skill sets that we're learning now, that we need now, because it's us, people who are prepared to come and take these courses, it's us who need to be in the vanguard of introducing these skills that are quite rare. We expect them maybe of religious ministers or people who are in the caring professions. But that's all of us now. We are all now in the caring mode. Caring is what is necessary now. And listening is a big part of it. Listening is one of your toolbox, one of the skills you can have in your back pocket to use when any crisis strikes, when somebody interrupts you and you're furious, when somebody steps on your toe in the subway or in the tube, when all these things that can happen, how do you react? What's your skill that comes into play in that moment? And I know that it becomes a habit to check yourself when something erupts for you, impatience, anger, fear, whatever it is. Developing the habit, you say, oh, I'm feeling disjointed, I'm feeling impatient, why can't we get on with this? And you can check that you're having that feeling, and then you have the leeway, you have the choice of what you do and how you react.
Welcome back. So I hope that that description of the exercise from Scilla was useful. And I wanted to spend a minute or two now just reflecting on what she said and offering you some advice on how you might take it into your own lives if it sparked interest for you. Now, I don't know if you practiced along with Scilla and thought about somebody in your life that you might use this tool with, somebody to resolve a conflict with. It doesn't have to be something big either, although it can be, of course. But if you have someone in your mind, it could be a colleague or a family member or a friend. I would really recommend, and the first time I worked with Scilla, actually, I did it like this, and I just wanted to share my experience with you. I'd really recommend having a practice with somebody you know who can receive what you want to say to that person. So almost like a role play, you can just sit with that person and imagine the person that you want to speak to. Let's say you're having, I'm going to just pick something out of the air. You're having a political disagreement with your older brother, and you're finding it difficult to talk to him about politics, for example, and it's driving a bit of a wedge between you. You can invite the other person who isn't the person you're thinking of to sit and receive what you've got to say. It's almost like a little rehearsal. And I did this the first time I met Scilla with a stranger, and it was a really profound experience. And that sitting, saying, would you be willing to sit with me for 5 minutes and I'll just tell you what's on my mind regarding this conflict? And having the other person repeat back to you what you said and what they perceived your feelings to be is an extraordinary, powerful thing. And I'd never predicted how profound I was going to feel after the first time I did it, especially because the person was a stranger, wasn't even the person I had in mind. And so I'd really recommend exploring that at the very least, because it's an extraordinary experience. And then if you have the courage, and if you think it would be useful, also exploring the person you have the conflict with, because I think Scilla's right. It's very unlikely for it to fail. It's a really powerful tool. So I just wanted to share that experience and that device that you could try if some of the things that Scilla has said have sparked interest. And I just want to remind you again of the exercise she talked us through at the beginning of the session. That really simple question, how are you really? And using that at the beginning of your first encounter with people, be it work meetings or family reunions or seeing old friends. It's a really powerful question and powerful in its simplicity. So that's enough from me. I'm going to welcome Kath back now to start the podcast.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jess. Well, firstly, what a powerful video. And I think, last week we learned the skill of breathing, which again, we don't really think of as a skill, but it is. And it can take you to a different state. Now we're learning about the skill of listening, which again, we probably don't really think of as a skill set. But yeah, I watched that video and thought, that's something I need to rewatch a few times and to definitely take on board. We had a couple of comments from our viewers, and a lovely couple of comments from Bharat, who's saying, power of speech, storytelling, very articulated words of wisdom, which is really, really nice. I'm going to pose a couple of questions on behalf of our audience, if that's okay, and very much coming from personal experience. But what would you advise if you're still in a place of anger? So if you've got a problem with somebody, a conflict with somebody, but you're still in that sort of heat of the anger phase, should you wait? Or
I think that's a great question. And I'd say certainly if Scilla was here, she would say it's important to take a moment and be okay with yourself before you enter into something like this, I'd say. And having said that, though, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that anger is not necessarily a negative emotion. Of course, it can have negative effects, but when you feel angry in a conflict situation like this, I think it's about that curiosity and noticing why. Ask yourself, why do I feel this way? What is it about this that is making me feel so angry? And why has this person's behavior affected me in this way? What is it about my experience that causes me to react like this? And I think taking that little bit of time for introspection before entering into the exercise that Scilla described is really important. But also, I would say, if you can manage your own anger enough to enter into that, would you be willing to spend half an hour with me and the exercise that Scilla described? I think you'll find that is a powerful tool for neutralizing anger, because, as Scilla said, it encourages compassion. And it's very, very difficult to remain in a state of anger if you're committed authentically to being in a space of compassion.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Jess. And again, you suggested practicing, so actually having a bit of a dry run with somebody that you don't know in order to get your words right, I suppose. But what happens if the person that you do need to speak to really you don't think they can receive? Do you think that's maybe your judgment of them and you should ignore that and carry on, or are there circumstances where sometimes, the
Well,
outcome may not be
I
what you
wouldn't like
expect.
to think it would always work. But I'd say so often, this is from personal experience, but I think it's true for a lot of people. So often what holds us back is being frightened of what somebody might say. And I think the reason Scylla tells us this exercise is so powerful is because it works so well. And I think if you have the courage to try, I think it is likely to go well. Obviously, we don't know, do we? I mean, it's in a very extreme situation, it might not go so well. But I think the effect of that level of attention and compassion builds a bridge between two parties that is very hard to refuse, if that makes sense.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks. And I think the other thing I just kept thinking about the whole way through that, again, I was trying to focus and listen, but I kept thinking about, isn't it strange how sometimes things come at special times? I mean, today, for example, I kept thinking, goodness me, I wish we could send Scylla to Ukraine or to Moscow today of all days, it's
absolutely. It's amazing that we kind of get what we need when we need it, I think. And I've had a few of those over the last few weeks, but I think that this skill, I'll reflect back on what you said at the beginning as well, Kath. It's we sort of think, oh yeah, listening, I've got that sorted. I know how to do that. I think so often, and I do this myself as well, particularly when I'm in a theatre context, when I'm directing, you're formulating what your response should be, and it's so rare that we listen without investing in what the outcome of what the other person says is. And we're always thinking, should I join them? Should I agree with them? Should I judge them? And it's often said that it's very, very hard to exist in a state of judgment if you're also in a state of wonder. Those two things really can't exist together. And I think the more that we can allow ourselves, our listening, to be a state of wonder more than a state of judgment, the better our conversations and interactions are.
And it's again, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, Sid obviously talked and picked out Nelson Mandela, but when you think about probably a lot of the leaders that we find inspirational, they all seem to have that trait, don't they, of being able to listen, that sort of calm command, the providing the space for things.
Absolutely.
I found it fascinating. We have actually got another question for you, Jess, from Clive, if that's okay. So firstly, thanks very much, Clive, for joining us again. I think you've come through the journey, actually. This is number 3. And I appreciated Scylla's wisdom. At 66, I'm working part-time and having more time to make space for non-essential conversation. I'd wish I'd had this luxury when life was hectic. Thoughts, Jess?
Oh, that so resonates with me, Clive. It's so hard to make time for things in our busy lives, isn't it? And there's always another thing to do. But I'd say it's actually for those of us who are working full time or who are finding it harder to fit in non-essential conversation, in your beautiful words, Clive, I'd say taking the time to really listen actually saves you time in the course of your day. Specifically with that question, how are you really, at the beginning of a meeting? If you can take time to tune into what someone's really saying, take that 15 minutes to check in, you can circumvent all sorts of problems down the line. So it's a small investment in something that might feel non-essential to really avoid more challenging difficulties and conflicts down the line. So that's my reflection on that.
Brilliant, thank you. One of the other pickouts, Scylla mentioned module 1. So now very curious as to, are there other modules or other bits of insight we can get from Scylla?
No, that's a great question. I think she says in this module. So I think what she's referring to there. So the videos we've watched, and I'm really pleased you brought this up, Kath, actually, because I should have said it last week. The videos we've been watching are part of what we at Sarsen have been calling the Light Connect Inquiry. And that's a program that we run for various organisations. We're working with Kath at Pizza Hut at the moment, which is extremely exciting. And we're working with a few other clients as well. So if anybody watching is interested in seeing more from brilliant, insightful, wise humans like Scylla or like Chris, the meditation expert that we worked with last week, I'd say please do reach out to us at Sarsen. We'd love to talk to you. So that's what she was referring to in terms of the module, that we've got more material from Scylla, but also from other kind of brilliant, insightful practitioners as well.
Well, it's interesting because, again, I'm often asked about, leadership programs and things that you recommend for leadership skills. And it's all of these things, isn't it? It's all of these things that we forget about that are just so vital.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I think the work that you do at CMI is so important, because I think often we become, we work hard and we're sort of expert in a certain area and we become leaders, and then we don't get any more training. Do you know what I mean? And people are just expected to be able to know how to lead, and they're skills that can be practiced and honed and supported. And it's exactly simple things like this, fundamental things like this, that we think is so important to explore.
Brilliant, thank you. Clive's just again making a comment about Ukraine and how they could benefit from this, and I think probably we'd all agree they could.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Yeah. Indeed, great. Well, I mean, that was a very profound session, and I say definitely one I'm going to rewatch again, and probably again. What have we got next week, Jess? We're going to do a preview for our final wrap up. Actually, it's number 4 next week.
Exactly, our final wrap up. So next week we're going to have a little bit more of a panel discussion involving some of us from Sarsen, and also your partners Kuth, I believe, are going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking more widely about how these tools, well-being and mindfulness, can be applied in the workplace, and also taking any more questions that you have as well. So it's going to be a bit more of a live panel discussion next week, which we're really looking forward to.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, just thank you so much again. Another fantastic session. And just to remind everybody that if you do post us your questions, we'll be collecting them all for next week's wrap up. And you can watch this video again if you follow us on YouTube. So I think just lastly, thank you very much, Jess. That's brilliant. Thanks
ever so much. It's been a pleasure to spend some time in your company. And I really hope you found that useful. It's a joy to share it with you. We're releasing you a little bit early this time, so a little bit shorter than the hour we spent together last week. But thank you very much.
Brilliant. And we'll join you next week again, same time, 5 o'clock next Thursday. Hopefully catch up with you all.